بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال هي راودتني عن نفسي وشهد شاهد من أهلها إن كان قميصه قد من قبل فصدقت وهو من الكاذبين وإن كان قميصه قد من دبر فكذبت وهو من الصادقين صدق الله العظيم. So we were busy discussing the 25th verse of the 111 verses of this amazing, fascinating, riveting story of Surah Yusuf, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about the trial, the tribulation, the affliction that happened to Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, where he was tested by the seduction of the wife of the minister of the Aziz, and how Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam was able to persevere and able to put down his own desires, was able to submit to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and was able to complete in total obedience. There's the story of Ismail, who is the authority in the Arabic language, for those who know. So he traveled to the countries or the outskirts or the villages of Yemen so that he could improve his linguistic capabilities. And at that time, in the outskirts or the Bedouins or the countryside, they were speaking that pure Fusha Arabic. So he traveled to the outskirts of Yemen. And he finds, as he's walking, it's written on a slack, it's written on a board, it's written on a plaque that someone had written, أَيَا مَعَشَرَ الْعُشَّاقِ بِاللَّهِ أُخْبِرُوا إِذَا اشْتَدَّ عِشْقٌ فَكَيْفَ يَصْنَعُ. Someone had written on this plaque, had engraved on this board, that oh those يَا مَعَشَرَ الْعُشَّاقِ بِاللَّهِ أُخْبِرُوا, all those people who have developed feelings and they are enrooted in fantasy and in love, and they have a crush or they have gone through the emotions of love. Can you give me some advice? إِذَا اشْتَدَّ عِشْقٌ فَكَيْفَ يَصْنَعُ. When this fantasy, this love, this desire, this passion is burning, riveting inside of me, what is that person supposed to do? So Ismail, he reads this, it's eloquent, it's amazing, it's a thought-provoking question. So he writes, يُدَاوِي هَوَاهُ وَيَكْتُمُ سِرَّهُ وَيَصْبِرُ فِي كُلِّ الْأُمُورِ وَيَخْضَعُ. Now they're having a discourse written on the slack. So he writes, يُدَاوِي هَوَاهُ. First and foremost, this person has to treat the illness of his heart. This person has to go to the remedy of the sickness of his heart. Often a time, nowadays in the society that we live in, we give all this importance. Oh, we should be physically strong, go to the gym, exercise, lift weights, cardio. You want a strong body, do this, yada, yada. And that's in its place. But it should not take the effect where now we have neglected the crux, which is the internal, the inner heart. لا ينفع مال ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم. Except the person who comes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a sound, pure heart. Prophet ﷺ said to the companion Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, إن استطعت أن تصبح وتمسي وليس في قلبك غش لأحد من المسلمين فافعل. If you're able to spend every night and every morning and there is no malice, animosity and hatred in your heart, then do so. For if you do that, then you have revived one of my sunnahs. If you revive one of my sunnahs, يُحِبُّنِي وَمَنْ يُحِبُّنِي كَانَ مَعِي فِي الْجَنَّةِ. And whoever loves me, me and him are walking together in Jannah. The couplets are coming to my mind. I feel like I may have shared them before. The poet, he says, ذهبت إلى الطبيب أريه حالي وهل يدري الطبيب بما جرى لي جلست فقال ما شكواك صفها لي فقلت الحال أبلغ من مقالي أتيتك يا طبيب على يقين بأنك لست تملك ما ببالي أنا لا أشتكي الحمى احتجاجه بل الحمى التي تشكو احتمالي فتحت إليك حلقي كي تراه فقل لي هل أكلت من الحلال وضعت على فم المقياس قل لي أسهم حرارة الإيمان عالي ودعت على فم المقياس قل لي أسهم حرارة الإيمان عالي سقامي من مخارفة الخطايا وليس من الزكام ولا السعال فإن كنت الطبيب فما علاج لذنب فوق رأسي كالجبال مسائل ما الدواء إذا مرضنا وداء القلب أولى بالسؤال. He says, oh, whenever we get sick, we rush to the doctor. So I go to the doctor, but I don't complain about the normal fever, the normal influenza. Rather, my sickness is complaining about my ability to persevere on the actual sickness that I have. I tell the doctor, don't put the thermostat down my throat so that you can check my internal temperature. Rather, I'm concerned is the fire of Iman beating inside of me. Don't check is my digestive system working properly. Rather, I'm only concerned have I ate a morsel with is anything other than halal. Don't check is my heart beating correctly, but tell me is my heart beating Quran. Whenever one of us becomes sick, we rush to the hospital, we rush to the emergency room, and that's in its place. وَدَاءُ الْقَلْبِ أَوْلَى بِالسُّؤَالِ. But surely the sickness of the heart has a higher right to be asked about. So he says, يُدَاوِي هَوَاهُ. First and foremost, let him cure the illnesses of his heart. Number two, يَكْتُمُ سِرَّهُ. He should conceal his fantasy, conceal his crush. Let the secret, put the secret to rest. Don't expose it. لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء. وَيَصْبِرُ فِي كُلِّ الْأُمُورِ. And learn to persevere and be patient in every matter. In English they say, what cannot be cured must be endured. وَيَصْبِرُ فِي كُلِّ الْأُمُورِ وَيَخْضَعُ. And then he submits to the decree and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Ismail continues on. The next day he passes by the slack again. And now this person has responded. He says, وَكَيْفَ يُدَاوِي وَالْهَوَاهُ قَاتِلُ الْفَتَى وَفِي كُلِّ يَوْمٍ قَلْبُهُ يَتَقَطَّعُ. He says, and how is it possible that a person is going to treat the illness of his heart when daily, when he rises in the morning, he is suffering an internal death on the basis of that crush and fantasy that he's feeling? How is he supposed to treat his soul? Every day he's dying a new death. So Ismail reads this, and then he writes, فَإِن لَمْ يَجِدْ صَبْرًا لِكِتْمَانِ سِرِّهِ فَلَيْسَ لَهُ شَيْءٌ سِوَى الْمَوْتِ أَنْفَعُ. He says, oh, if the case is that this person is not able to persevere on the concealment of his secret and on the reconciliation of the illnesses of his heart, فَلَيْسَ لَهُ شَيْءٌ سِوَى الْمَوْتِ أَنْفَعُ. Then nothing is going to benefit this person except death. Nothing is going to benefit this person except death. He's a breath in body, but he's a dead man walking. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اسْتَجِيبُوا لِلَّهِ وَلِلرَّسُولِ إِذَا دَعَاكُمْ لِمَا يُحْيِيكُمْ. Return and obey and answer the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding what? لِمَا يُحْيِيكُمْ. What is going to give you life? What is going to give you life? أَلَا كُلُّ شَيْءٍ مَا خَلَى اللَّهُ بَاطِلُ وَكُلُّ نَعِيمٍ لَا مَحَالَةَ زَائِلُ اللهم لا عيش إلا عيش الآخرة. This is life. لما يحييكم. It says سوى الموت أنفع. ليس له شيء سوى الموت أنفع. Then death is the only thing that's going to cure such a person. And he leaves. The next day he comes back and he finds written on the board. He says سمعنا وأطعنا ثم متنا فبلغوا سلامتي لمن كان وصل يمنع. He says, oh, okay, we've heard, we've obeyed, and now we have passed away. He wrote this before he committed. He passed away. سمعنا وأطعنا ثم متنا فبلغوا سلامتي لكل من للوصل يمنع. He says, oh, convey my salutations, convey my abode. And in other poems he writes, hani and laka, woe be to that person, or glad tidings to that person who's able to persevere in life with this crush and this fantasy that he's going through, living this life of sin. إذا خلوت بريبة في ظلمة والنفس داعية إلى الطغيان فاستحي من نظر الإله وقل لها إن الذي خلق الظلام يراني. He has to learn to conceal his sin, conceal his desires, put his ego to rest. So this woman, she was busy, she was inclined, she had this fantasy, this infatuation. She chased after Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, وَاسْتَبَقَ الْبَابِ وَقَدَّتْ قَمِيصَهُ مِنْ دُبُرٍ. They're running to the door and she rips the back of his shirt. وَأَلْفَيَا أَيْ وَجَدَ سَيِّدَهَا لَدَى الْبَابِ. They get to the door, they find her master. In this, the Mufassirun write so many points about marriage. Number one is how the wife is supposed to respect and revere the husband, where she addresses him with terms of respect, سَيِّدَهَا لَدَى الْبَابِ. But on the flip side, it also gives the indication to the husband that when he is deserving of such titles of respect, it comes with a role that he has to play. You don't get the respect without playing the role. He has a role and she has a role too. سيدها لدى الباب. قالت ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوءا إلا أن يسجن أو عذاب أليم. As soon as they find the master, oh, now it's an awkward moment. She has to acquit herself. She's quick to judge. She's quick to have a response. She's got a silver tongue, gift of the gab. She says, ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوء. What do you think is oh my husband, what do you think should be the proper recompensation for a person who wanted to commit immorality with your wife? إِلَّا أَن يُسْجَنْ أَوْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Except that he is imprisoned or he suffers a painful punishment. And they say, آخِرُ سَهْمٍ فِي كِنَانَةِ الْمُلُوكِ. the last quiver or the last bow in the quiver of the king is violence, because nobody else can display violence. آخر سهم في كنانة الملوك, violence. So this is where we got to. وإلف يا سيدها لدى الباب. So قالت ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوء إلا أن يسجن أو عذاب أليم. So now Yusuf alayhi salatu wassalam, it has now become incumbent on him that he clears his reputation, that he clears the air, he sets the record straight. قال هي راودتني عن نفسي. قال هي راودتني عن نفسي. Actually, what had happened was she was trying to get me to commit this sin with her. She was the one who was seducing me. She was the one who invited and seducted me. قال هي راودتني عن نفسي. The Quran says ولا تجسسوا. It is not the obligation, or it is not the right, or it is not proper for the believer that he probes on the faults of others, or he exposes the faults of others. But when it comes to your own reputation, and now you have to set the record straight, now it becomes a mandation on you that you do so. He says, قَالَ هِيَ رَاوَدَتْنِي عَنْ نَفْسِي. She seduced me. So now they're at a standstill. It's at a loggerhead. It's her word versus his qawl versus her statement versus his. But this is what I was saying when we ended last week. When you are clean in conscience and you have that God consciousness and taqwa and piety and iman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's own cameras will expose the wrongdoers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send means and asbab and photographic cameras that will expose those people who are on batil and are on falsehood and are lying. وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا. Well, how does the camera of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala work? A witness from her own family. Shahida shahidun min ahliha. It's from her own family. Why? Because if it was from some outside family or some friend of Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, then this person's biased. This person's got an agenda. He came with a plot. He came with a plan. Shahida shahidun min ahliha. A witness testified against her from her own family. Now, the Quran, in terms of the witnessing, and the witness is vague, it's ambiguous. It doesn't say, is it a boy, a girl, young, old, adult, child? But the narrations of the hadith, which are supported by Imam Hakim rahimahullah and other muhaddithun, they have the narration that this shahid, the shahid was a child. It was a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that a child spoke and he uttered a statement in the defense of the innocence of Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. It was a child. And we know from the authentic narrations that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said there were 4, and in other narrations 5, who spoke from the cradle, who spoke from as a baby. Isa alayhi salatu wasalam and Maryam alayha min Allah as-salatu wa taslimat radiyallahu anha. She came and she presented the baby. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells her, and when your nation has an objection and has i'rad against you, فَأَشَارَتْ إِلَيْهِ. Then just point to the baby. فَأَشَارَتْ إِلَيْهِ. قَالُوا كَيْفَ نُكَلِّمُ مَنْ كَانَ فِي الْمَهْدِ صَبِيًّا. The people asked her, oh, and how are we going to talk to a child? كَيْفَ نُكَلِّمُ مَنْ كَانَ فِي الْمَهْدِ صَبِيًّا. قال إني عبد الله آتاني الكتاب وجعلني نبيا والماضي في المستقبل للتأكيد. He says إني عبد الله, and he gave this response. So this was a child who spoke from the cradle. And so beautiful in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala writes, وَيُكَلِّمُ النَّاسَ فِي الْمَهْدِ وَكَهْلًا. وَيُكَلِّمُ النَّاسَ فِي الْمَهْدِ وَكَهْلًا. And Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, he spoke as a baby, and similarly he will speak as an old man. The Mufassirun write, what is the benefit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that Isa alayhi salatu wasalam will speak as an old man? Every old man can speak. Every old man can deliver a speech. What is the benefit of this? The Mufassirun write that there are 2 benefits. Number 1, it shows that his speaking as a child was at the same level as a person of wisdom in their own age. He spoke with as much eloquence, as much wisdom, as much hikmah, as much logic as a person in their old age. Number 2, it gives a subtle ishara and indication to the return of Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. Why? Because according to historical narrations, when he was raised to the skies, he was no more than 33 years old. So how is it possible he could speak as an old man if he was departed at 33 years old? So he gives ishara and indication to his return. وَيُكَلِّمُ النَّاسَ فِي الْمَهْدِ وَكَهْلًا. And then in the authentic narrations, there is the story of Sahibu Jurayj. where at the time there was a very pious person, an abid, كان يعبد الله كثيرا. He would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala excessively and abundantly in his own chamber and his own place and monastery of worship. The day comes, فأتت أمه, his mother comes to visit him. فدعت, she calls out to him. And as she calls out to him, this Jurayj who's busy in his salah, he thinks to himself, Ummati wa salati, my mother, ummi wa salati, my mother or my salah. And he preferred his salah. فصرخت ثانية. So then she shouts and she calls out to him for a second time. And he says, Ummi wa salati, my mother or my salah. And he chooses his salah. And she calls out for a third time. And he says, my mother, my salah. He chooses his salah. So then his mother responds, Allahumma inna hadha jurayjun ibni. كلمته فأبى أن يكلمني فلا تمته إلا أن تري حتى تريه وجوه المومسات. He says, then the mother made a supplication, but not a supplication for good, but rather for evil. She said, this is my son Jurayj. كلمته فأبى أن يكلمني. I called out to him, but he refused to speak to me. فلا تمته, don't let him die حتى تريه وجوه المومسات, till the day comes that he is exposed to the face of those women who commit adultery and those fornicating and women of fahisha. So the day happened where there was this woman at that time who was known for her promiscuity, her fahisha, her falsehood, and they sent her to go and seduce Jurayj. So when she comes to Jurayj, he refuses, he denies. So then she goes and she has access to a local shepherd, and from that union a baby is born. She comes back to the community. Oh, inna hadha ibn Jurayj. This is the child of Jurayj. So the people in an uproar, and this is how man works. They never check. They never double check the facts. They hear something and they base everything on a rumor. Oh, this is the child of Jurayj. They go to his monastery, they tear it down. Then they bring Jurayj. Oh, you are just a person who was deceiving people with your ibadah. And they drag him through the streets. And they take him through the alleyways where this promiscuity was happening. And he was seeing all the faces of these immoral women. And as he's looking at them, فَبَكَى ثُمَّ تَبَسَّمَ, he cries and then he smiles. And then he goes and he prays 2 rakat, فَصَلَّى رَكَعَتَيْنِ, and he asks for the baby. He says, bring the baby. He says, يَا غُلَامْ وَطَعَنَهُ فِي بَطْنِهِ, and he pokes the baby in his stomach. And he says, يَا غُلَامْ مَنْ أَبُوكَ, oh baby, who's your dad? Who's the father? And the baby says, the shepherd is my father. So this was number 2, Jurayj. So then the people said, oh, نَبْنِي صَوْمَعَتَكَ مِنْ ذَهَبٍ, we're going to build your monastery back from gold. He says, no. مِنْ فِضَّةٍ, from silver. He says, no. Build it as it was from before. So Sahibu Jurayj, number 2. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah, He says, شَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِنْ أَهْلِهَا. So the Mufassirun say, it was a child. However, there is also the other opinion, even though it's marjuh, that was an adult, a full functioning adult. But what does he say? That is what's more eloquent. He says, إِنْ كَانَ قَمِيصُهُ قُدَّ مِنْ قُبُلٍ فَصَدَقَتْ وَهُوَ مِنَ الْكَاذِبِينَ. If the shirt is torn from the, إِنْ كَانَ قَمِيصُهُ قُدَّ مِنْ قُبُلٍ, if the shirt is torn from the front, فَصَدَقَتْ وَهُوَ مِنَ الْكَاذِبِينَ, she is speaking the truth and he is lying. Because that shows that he tore off the shirt himself, if it's torn from the front. وَإِنْ كَانَ قَمِيصُهُ قُدَّ مِنْ دُبُرٍ, however, if the shirt is torn from the back, فَكَذَبَتْ وَهُوَ مِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ, she is lying and he is from the truthful people. This is not a blanket rule that this is how it always works. But in this specific case, this was evidence. فَصَدَقَتْ وَهُوَ مِنَ الْكَاذِبِينَ وَإِنْ كَانَ قَمِيصُهُ قُدَّ مِنْ دُبُرٍ فَكَذَبَتْ وَهُوَ مِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ. So then the minister, looking at this miracle happening, a baby speaking, he says, wow, profound. فَلَمَّا رَأَى قَمِيصَهُ قُدَّ مِنْ دُبُرٍ قال إنه من كيدكن إن كيدكن عظيم. So when the minister فلما رأى, the Aziz, the vicegerent, he looks at the shirt, it was ripped from the back. So he says, إنه من كيدكن, this is from your plot, this is from your deception, this is from your plan. And he uses كيدكن and not ki. He uses the plural and not the singular, and we'll come back to that. إِنَّ كَيْدَكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ, verily your plan, your deception, your plot, your mockery, oh, it's ever great, it's ever azim, it's ever strenuous. You're ever plotting and planning. First you seduced him, you invited him, then he refused. Now you're trying to claim he was the one who seduced you, and you're fabricating this whole story, and you have this whole manipulation and gaslighting. إِنَّ كَيْدَكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ, إِنَّ كَيْدَكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ. But what's the message? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that a person is on truth and knows that a person is on haqq, then the cameras of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will expose the ones who are on falsehood. Aisha radiallahu anha, she says that when I was accused by Abdullah bin Ubay as-Salul of ifk, in the incident of ifk, and the accusation was hurled, I too thought that my innocence would be professed and explained on the lips of a child. But Imam Qurtubi rahimahullah, he writes that لما رميت العائشة بالفاحشة ما رضيت لها ببراءة صبي ولا نبي. He says لما رميت عائشة بالفاحشة, when Aisha radiallahu anha was accused with whatever fabricated accusations she had, ما رضيت لها بريئة من نبي ولا صبي, it wouldn't have been enough for her exoneration to be on the lips of a child nor a prophet. It had to come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. And this speaks about the volume of the honor of Aisha radiallahu anha. Point number 2. We had said that when the wife, Zulaykha or Ra'il, she had seduced Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, what did she do? وَغَلَّقَتِ الْأَبْوَابِ. She had locked the doors. She closed the doors. Now Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, in hoping to escape, he runs to the door. The doors are locked. The Quran is explicit. The doors are locked. But he's running to the door. وَاسْتَبَقَ الْبَابِ. He flees to the door. This shows that the action of man is that before the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes, he has to also make his own effort and take his own initiative. The door is locked. That's in the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's in the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The door is locked. That's not your concern. You make your way to the door. If Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam did not rush to the door, she would not have torn the shirt from the back. And then when the minister comes, they would have no evidence. She had to take some steps, and through his action, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the evidence. There was a person who was wrongly accused, and he was summoned to jail. And every Friday, while he was spending his innocently incarcerated time in prison and jail, every Friday he would come to the door of his cell, and he would say that, "Oh Allah, amartani bis salah, you have ordered us with salah, wa qult fas'au ila dhikrillah, and you have said hasten to the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is all I'm able to do. This is in my capability. I can only come to the door of my cell. That's what I can do." Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, whether the doors are open, the doors are locked, all he could do was rush to the doors. You take the first step, and if you are incorrect and you are right, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will exonerate and profess that truth, and profess those who are false or unfalse, and those who are truth untruth. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us understanding and tawfiq. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا شر ما قضيت فإنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك إنه لا يعز من عاديت ولا يذل من واليت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت نستغفرك ربنا ونتوب إليك اللهم اهدنا واهد بنا واهد الناس جميعا واجعلنا سببا لمن اهتدى ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه اللهم أحسن ختامنا وتوفنا على كلمة لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله آمين يا رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد.